It provides a cultural opportunity for students as well as the community to explore the rich heritage of St. Bernard and the New Orleans area.
My name is Nick Sly, and I'm the new coordinator of the History Lecture Series started by Curtis. We have a very, very special night, great speaker, and we're really honored to have the members of the St. Bernard Fire Department here tonight, and for Michelle to be able to share her work. But before we get started, Michelle Miner is going to sing the national anthem, so if you would please rise.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Okay, so as I'm sure many of you know, tonight's speaker is Michelle Buuck. This is the Nunez History Lecture Series, and we do this the first Monday of every month throughout the year. July and August will be off. This is a special lecture. We don't usually do it in June, but since there's so much to talk about these days in St. Bernard Parish, we decided to do this lecture. We're extremely pleased to have Michelle here, first because she has completed this wonderful book that she did over a year called Firestorm. But also because she's a graduate of this college. And we just had a wonderful graduation last week, and we looked around at another 90 students that graduated from here. And you see more and more of our students here doing this type of work. So we really applaud Michelle for coming back and for sharing with us. And we're quite honored to have these gentlemen here with us, who I'm sure many of you know a lot about their story, but that's why Michelle is here, and they're here tonight to share some more. So if you could please give a very warm welcome to the members of the St. Bernard Fire Department and Miss Michelle Buuck.
Okay, it's so good to be here, and it's so good to be here for this reason. I'm Michelle Buuck, and I wrote the book Firestorm, and I can't really talk about stories or what happened during the storm because that's not my story to tell, it's their stories to tell. But what I do want to share with you is how the book came about and why. Now, we all know why. Because August 29th, 2005, Katrina happened. And the majority of us were not here. But there were some who were here expressly for the purpose to help others. After the storm, I have a son who's a firefighter, and he came home very changed. And I knew that the things that happened here were difficult for him to talk about. And he didn't really talk about them. All he said was, "Mom, you should interview the firefighters and write a book because there's a story there." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, later." And then he said, "Mom, you really need to do this." And he kept telling me this, and he said it many, many times until I was ready to do it. So I went to see Chief Stone, and I pitched the idea and talked to a couple of the firemen. And they decided it would be a good idea if we did it. And if all the proceeds would go to the firemen, which is where the proceeds are going to go. But I had two reasons for doing this, two very important reasons. The first of them was that this book, and I just got the email 2 days ago, that it is officially in the Library of Congress. It is registered, and it is on the shelves, and it will be there forever. Forever. And it's a part of history now. And what I said about my son was apparently true about a lot of the men. They couldn't talk about it. But they could take this book and hand it to their children and say, this is what Daddy did. And they could hand it down to their children and to their children. And it will be here forever. I didn't think they got the recognition they deserved for what they went through. I didn't think people really appreciated it, simply because they didn't know what exactly these men and women of the fire department did for all of us and for this parish. And this book currently is being read in 26 states of this country. And that surprised me, because I didn't think people in Nebraska would want to read about the St. Bernard Fire Department, but somebody does because they're selling up there. And that's exciting because people need to know that there are still men like this in this world. The last reason was because I was tired of the negative stories that I kept hearing about the St. Bernard Fire Department. In the newspaper, everywhere you looked, everybody wanted to tell you what they did wrong. And I talked to a great many of these men, and I looked into their faces and I looked into their eyes, and I can tell you they were not damaging property, they were not stealing, and they were not shooting dogs. But that seems to be what everybody wanted to talk about, and that's just not true. They were heroes. And that's the main thing I wanted everybody to know. There are a lot of firemen here that are not sitting on the stage. I want everybody to show them how much we appreciate. All the St. Bernard firefighters, please stand up at this time. Those are the celebrities in this world, guys. Those are the celebrities. I'm going to turn this over to Chief Stone in a moment, and then we're going to get to some questions and answers that they're going to answer for any question that you have. How many people have already read the book? Okay, so you might already have some questions in mind. Once again, it's their story, it's not mine. So if you have a specific question about the book, about researching or writing it, I'll answer it, but any of the specific stories they can answer. I'm going to turn this over to Chief Stone now. I want to thank him and the firemen for giving me the privilege and the honor to tell their story. They are an extraordinary group of men and women, and it was my privilege to do this book. So I'm going to turn this over to Chief Stone.
Michelle. Good evening. Well, I never thought of all the talks and lectures and classes that I've taught that I've ever be standing up here for a history lecture on a book about the St. Bernard Parish Fire Department, and I thank Michelle Buuck for that. I am so pleased that someone was able to tell the story. I can't begin to tell you how proud I am of all the firefighters of St. Bernard Parish, past and present, that participated in Hurricane Katrina. Under the new National Incident Management System, or what's called NIMS, this is called a Type 1 incident. So we were involved in one of the truly only Type 1 incidents in the nation. Their ingenuity was fantastic, their fortitude, professionalism. You never heard hardly any complaining at all during the time that we were needed. They were rescuing people, they would pass their homes and see that they lost everything like everyone and didn't skip a beat. I think Michelle did a great story on the book, and just a couple light notes. First of all, somebody pointed out to me in the program, it says I'm the acting chief. No, I'm not the acting chief, I'm the fire chief. So, have been for quite a long time, so no acting about it. But just to give you a little bit of history of some of the things about the book. First of all, the administration of the parish government really delayed us in calling back all of our firefighters. We were one of the only fire departments in the metro area that had a hurricane guideline that called for activating all of our firefighters. And we did that years ago because I was told by a wise chief who retired from the New Orleans Fire Department that if you didn't bring everybody back in, you would never get them in if we had a major emergency, because roads would be blocked, and in this case there was water everywhere. So we decided that we would bring our people in, and this went back to the fire department, probably to the chief before I became chief in Lester Curo, and it was something that we maintained. After Hurricane George, when we had a very close call, we decided to change our hurricane guidelines, and I tell you what, our hurricane guidelines worked perfect all the way up until it flooded. Then we didn't have any more guidelines. We didn't have any boats either because our boat sunk, but that was a story in itself. And for the next hurricane, the guidelines say if the water's rolling in from the west side, move the boats to the east side of the building so they don't get caught under the overhang and sink. But that's another story. But we had learned a lot from Hurricane George, and we had, when we were finally told that we could activate, I brought in the 3 deputy fire chiefs, and I see Deputy Chief Riley Richards, who's in the background, and I turned over the operations to him, and he stayed on the roof. I had to get in the boat. I had to see what was going on in the parish and what the parish looked like. But Chief Richards and Deputy Chief A.J. Serentine and Deputy Chief Warren Drews, they became our planning section. We activated our planning section, and they began to plan on how we were going to bring the platoons back in. To be honest with you, the administration of the government delayed us because they didn't want to pay the overtime, believe it or not. FEMA reimbursed us for some of that money somewhere, but they didn't want to pay for the overtime, so it actually delayed us bringing in one of the platoons, and actually came in very late at about 1500 hours or 3 p.m. that Sunday. And this delayed a lot of our actions and movement of our personnel. At one time during the book, you saw where we were sending them to the courthouse, where we were having the meetings in the EOC, and it was determined that that was a parish government building, and that's where we could stage one of our task forces. Well, we just forgot to tell the judges and the court workers and the sheriff's deputies, because that was already going to be their staging area. So we had moved equipment there, only to find out that there was no room for us there. And I think that was an act of God, because I think God wanted our firefighters to be at Chalmette High School. And I know in one part of the book I see District Chief Figuera, who's retired now, he said where he got tired of moving and got on the radio and made a radio call. Well, Andrew, I didn't hear that call. Somebody must have filtered it out. But the reason that they moved so late is because, you know, they came in late and then the courthouse was full. But someone wanted us to have a presence at Chalmette High School, along with Mrs. Voce and all of her people and staff and Mr. Warner. And that was done for a reason, and I think that was a decision that was made well above our commanders and command post. And thank God, because they did a fantastic job at Shellman High School. And our deputy chiefs were great, and they've all retired and left me. Can you believe that? Unbelievable. I don't know. I was showering twice a day once we got water, just to, you know, make sure they'd stay around. But our deputy chiefs retired, and then we promoted one of our district chiefs, Armin Buuck, to deputy chief, and he retired, and then a lot of our district chiefs retired, and we're down right now 25 positions in the fire department, and we've lost 500 years of experience. How do you replace that? You just can't. But some of the things that were done are unbelievable. They'd go out and they'd find a boat and it wouldn't start, so they'd take the battery out of that boat, and they'd go along and they'd find another boat that wouldn't start, and they'd take the fuel out of that boat, and then they'd go and get the third boat started. And at one time I was the fire chief of the largest fireboat flotilla that the world had ever seen. I don't think anybody had more fireboats than we did. But they really did a great job. And I'm so proud of them. And I would try to get them together once we got in the same spot, which took about 4 days. And just to let them know that, you know, all we had was each other. We were like everybody else. We lost everything we owned. But we had each other, and we were still lucky that we still had a job, and we still had a mission. And I see Captain Murphy's in the background, and I know that they found a lady who was flat on her back 7 days after the hurricane, that had we not been there, she would have never been rescued. And I know he had to put her under arrest to rescue her, you know. So we actually had police powers. They deputized us. And I would call them on the radio at night, we would talk, and we would come out and we would be up from sun up to sundown and way past, and we started making rules where we wanted 2 firefighters in a boat with the radio. Even though our radio system went down, our repeaters flooded, radio antennas went down, we still had what's called the simplex channel, and it's kind of like a line of sight walkie-talkie. So we would have to relay messages from building to building, from boat to boat, and we would pass messages back and forth that way. And fire departments are the greatest in the world when it comes to command and control, but you take away their communication system and they're like every other organization, very, very hard. So we would relay messages, and at night when we would come in, then we would have these planning meetings, and then we would go ahead and send the word out to our captains at Shellman High School and our district chiefs at the Civic Auditorium and Domino Sugar Refinery, and we would get the word out. And then we had these 4 brave souls down at St. Bernard High School. They were on their own, and it was amazing what they did. And that was Kevin Zanko, Raul Vallecilio, Rodney Orso, and Michael LeBeau. And we were so worried about them because you would hear rumors about everything that was going on. Like I see Dr. Patuzzi's out there, and we had the rumor about the 25 bodies that were tied together in Jumonville, which was a rumor. That became Hurricane Urban Legends. So we had Hurricane Urban Legends, and we just heard so much that part of the school collapsed and this and that. And I guess on about Wednesday, I had went into Chalmette Refinery with engineer Shane Lulai, and we got in the gate, and we realized that their fire apparatus weren't underwater. And we went in, and we, like Michelle said, we didn't take anything. We borrowed some things, and we borrowed their fire apparatus. And we drove it out the gate, and once we cleared the roof of the First Baptist Church that was in the middle of St. Bernard Highway, that took a while, we got all the way down to Jumonville before the water was too high to drive the apparatus through. And I was calling them on the radio because a mobile radio has a stronger signal than a portable radio. And I heard the most wonderful voice that I've heard in a long time. And where's Captain Orso? He's sitting right here. You know, I don't want to say he's wonderful, but, you know, us Navy guys, you live on a ship, you're pretty close. But I heard his voice on the radio at St. Bernard High School, and that was the first time, Rodney, in 4 days that y'all had been able to communicate with us. And I was just elated that they were okay. And then we loaded up one of the sheriff's department's amphibious vehicle. We put some of our firefighters on it and some of their deputies. When we finally got permission, took a couple hours, and we loaded it up with water and supplies to send it down there to bring to St. Bernard High School. And only recently did I find out that it never made it. It actually broke down, so they sent the second amphibious vehicle, and it broke down. In some kind of way, the water and stuff got put on a dump truck and sent down to them. But I was extremely proud of them and proud of all the firefighters. And the stories, I read the book and actually found out a couple of things that I didn't know. Like when Nick Elsenson left to go rescue his animals in the middle of, I didn't know that, Nick. I remember that, Nick. You know. But she gave me the manuscript to read, and I brought it home to my wife Lauren and I, and I've never seen my wife read so fast. You know, she was 90 pages ahead of me after one Friday evening. And then I found out that's because she stayed up to 6 o'clock Saturday morning reading the book. So I had fell asleep, so I fixed her. I woke up like at 5 a.m. on Sunday and caught back up. And I just couldn't put it down. And I know when it's about you, it's easier to read. But there were so many people that did so many wonderful things, the sheriff's deputies and the parish employees and all our doctors and nurses, the civilians who rescued. From the Violet Canal eastward, our citizens rescued themselves because we never made it past the densely populated areas. We couldn't get past. And Captain Gallador and his story and St. Rita's, and you know, that's what I determined was a tragedy within a tragedy. And then to have the largest residential oil spill in the history of the United States occur during Hurricane Katrina, just that alone, we would have been all over CNN. It would have been great. And but it wasn't, and we never did anything. The federal government came in and federalized it immediately. And then our council members did fantastic things, and one of them we're going to have to make an honorary firefighter. Oh, there he is, Councilman Tafaro. You know, he was wonderful, and Mr. Rodriguez had just got operated on and never left. And I remember the first shower that I actually got to take that wasn't the 16.9 ounce bottle of water shower. I perfected that. It was pretty good. Good thing I didn't have as long hair like I did when I was a teenager. But was in Chalmette Refinery with filtered river water. And you know, it was like dirty water, but it was clean. And I'll never forget seeing Mr. Raleigh, our district attorney, in there with his towel. I had to wait for him. He took a long shower. Miss Lena, you have to tell him to speed it up next time. But to see all of our officials that never left, and it's amazing, the stories, but I was just excited that our story got to be told. And I don't know if you heard, but we had rescuers that came in from all over the country after 6 days to help us. And you hear about the Canadian Mounties. Well, the Canadian Mounties never made it to St. Bernard Parish. The Vancouver Search and Rescue Team, who by the way was headed by firefighters, made it to St. Bernard, and they were the first bona fide urban search and rescue team. So to come all the way from Vancouver, Canada, go through customs, have to get the manager to open up the Lafayette Airport, drive into Kenner, Louisiana to be told that they couldn't help and they had to turn back, to run into 2 state troopers who lived in St. Bernard Parish, come down the river, meet the sheriff, be brought to Chalmette Refining. And then as they're leaving the meeting, I walk into the hall and I see these guys dressed as what we call USAR teams, USAR members. And I said, hey, I've been looking for you guys. I said, I'm the fire chief. They said, we've been looking for you. And they proceeded to take a little band out of their pocket and put it on my wrist that says, everyone goes home. And Vancouver actually was the first urban search and rescue team. The first team who actually came in and helped us was 57 police officers from Calcasieu Parish. And my oldest son, Tommy, was a student at McNeese State, and he had called the PIO of the Calcasieu Parish Sheriff's Office, along with everyone else he called. And they sent 57 police officers here from Lake Charles, Sulphur, Louisiana, and Calcasieu Parish. And that was our first help, and they got in here Tuesday night, and our Sheriff's Department immediately plugged them into helping with security. Now, we had a National Guard force of 6 security officers at Jackson Barracks, and they came into a meeting with General Downer, and they didn't have any ammunition. So our Sheriff's Department had to give them ammunition. So kind of like when I was overseas, and I would be on a quarterdeck watch, and I'd have 45 with 2 bullets, and they were both in a clip that wasn't in the gun, you know. But, and then former Councilman Mike Baham got the Baldwin County, Alabama Search and Rescue Team in, And Baldwin County is a pretty big county. They came in with 17 members, including the chief of police, and his name was Whittington, and he was a great guy. And then Pensacola, Escambia County, came in with 23 members of their search and rescue team. So they were the first people that got to help us. And then Michelle was very politically correct. She didn't put anything in the book that was wrong. When the Shreveport Fire Department got to North Chalmette on Parish Road, and we heard that people were coming in out of the marsh, hundreds of them. And I said, we got to go see this. So a gentleman named Paul, and I'm sorry I can't tell you his last name, from the U.S. Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, or the U.S. Department of Interior, the federal wildlife and fisheries people, he got me on an airboat and he sent me out there. And here was day 6. There's the Shreveport Fire Department, all of these EMS units, because you know Acadian left us. They left us for 8 days, and I hope no one ever forgets that. There's all these people out there, and they're not coming into the parish. And I get there, and there's some of my firefighters, 2 of our captains, Norman Ellis and Carl Baruta, and they're totally upset. And that's because they didn't recognize them as firefighters. Well, by this time, we didn't have uniforms anymore. You know, it was trying to wash things out and put them back on, and my white shirt was gray, and they were upset. So, man, I jumped on those Shreveport guys really big time and told them that these were firefighters, and they were captains with the St. Bernard Parish Fire Department, and they were some of the best damn firefighters in this country. And they had our people out there sitting in the sun. They weren't letting them get on the bus. So I proceeded to load the bus up. We packed them up like sardines. Someone said, can we take our pets? I said, if they can sit on your lap, you can take them. And I tell you what, that was the biggest dog I ever saw sitting on that man's lap. But, and they got him out of there. And the next day they were gone. They never came back, you know. And Baton Rouge, oh my goodness, Chief Smith and his people were fantastic to us. They sent firefighters down by barge. Chad Majors is one of the union officials from Baton Rouge, and one of our retired firefighters, Craig Miller Sr., and they came down and they brought underwear and socks in the middle of the night. They like snuck down the river. And then they barged in firefighters to work with us the entire day, and they wound up giving us an office for 7 weeks in their headquarters. And we were able to send Deputy Chief Richards up there, and Inspector Malosson went, and our administrative assistant went, and they ordered us uniforms and got us some vehicles, and we were able to get back on our feet because of what Chief Smith and his department did for us, so that was great. My youngest son, who actually stayed because he kept telling me if I didn't call his coach, he was going to lose his baseball scholarship, and I kept saying on Friday, I'm going to call, and they said, did you call? And I said, oh, I forgot. You know, trying to get the department ready. All day Saturday, they said, did you call? And I said, I'm going to call in 10 minutes. And I forgot. And finally, when I called Sunday morning, the coach said, oh, no, Mr. Stone, you keep him and take good care of him. And by that time, I told my wife, I said, it's too late for you to leave. And they had left for every storm before. And we wound up sticking a fire department shirt on him, and I stuck him in the boat with Captain Murphy. And he knows all about that guy pulling the pirogue with the ice chest. And Michelle didn't know what was in those ice chests, but Captain Murphy, I'm going to have to tell the truth, the man had liquor in one of those ice chests, you know, because I know y'all passed him later that day, and he was drinking his beer out of his ice chest. But that liquor was more important to that man than his life. And we put a fire department shirt on Chad, and he rescued people for a couple of days with the firefighters. And now both of my sons say, next hurricane, they're not leaving. So they're both gone, don't worry about that. But a lot of great things happened. A lot of people did a lot of great things for us. And I hope I didn't forget anybody, because people were so good to us. But for every bad thing that happened to us, there was 1,000 good things. And there was people that were trying to order us to order our firefighters out of the parish. And it was unbelievable. And they called me up from the State Fire Marshal's office, and they said, the State Fire Marshal is ordering you to order all your firefighters out of the parish. Now, we wouldn't have rescued that lady flat on her back 7 days after the storm. And I said, I knew we had an acting fire marshal. And I said, oh, I didn't know we had a fire marshal. And they said, yes, we do. And I said, well, who's that? And they said, it's Mr. Fry. He's an architect. And the architects are good people, too, except when they don't build buildings to the fire code. But I said, well, he doesn't have any authority over me. And they said, oh, yes, he does. And I said, well, whose authority does he have? And they said, he has the authority of the governor. And excuse my French. And I said, well, tell him I said to bite me. And I hung the phone up. And somebody told me it got back to the governor that I told her to bite me. But that's not true, you know. And they would call up and they'd say, what do you need? What do you need? And I said, we need generic shirts that say fire. Just a blue T-shirt that says fire. And they said, you got it. And they'd call back the next day and they'd say, what do you need? What do you need? And I'd say, I need a generic shirt that says fire. And I never got fired. The guys didn't have shirts. They went and found these shirts and they said, F milk got pot. I said, you got to turn those inside out. They said, okay, Chief. And they did. And then they had some purple shirts that said, Happy Mardi Gras. So we had Mardi Gras Fire Department for a while. And then lo and behold, here comes 2 cases of T-shirts that Butch Browning, the fire chief of Gonzales, Louisiana, brought to us. And we were all members of the Gonzales Fire Department for a couple of weeks. And that's the largest the Gonzales Fire Department has ever been in their history. And then they'd call up again and say, what do you need? And I'd tell them what we need. And it wouldn't come. So finally they called me one day and I was telling Dr. Pattucci and Miss Ruth and David Pacey, our parish attorney, this story a few minutes ago. They said, what do you need? And I said, Chief Ellis is looking, 50 pizzas and 10 cases of beer. And they said, no, really, what do you need? I said, 50 pizzas and 10 cases of beer. So it took 2 days for them to realize that I was serious. And it took another 2 days. They said, oh, you got it. And then it took another 2 days that I kept reminding them that they said, we got it. And sure enough, here comes a Suburban one night. And Brad Williamson, who District Chief Vergara worked with on building some of our new pumpers, and he designed some beautiful trucks, Andrew. I have to give it to you. And I'll tell you folks that story in a second. They pull up in a Suburban, and they have 50 pizzas and 2 cases of iced down beer. They needed to relax. They needed to let their hair down. They didn't have any more hair. They were shaving it all. They all looked like Chief Ellis, you know? And some of them had Mohegans, and they wanted to shave my head. Now look, I see Rob Elsello sitting out there with no hair, and it's like, if they would have shaved my head, it would have never grew back. I only got a little bit, you know? And Maryland immediately put their people on a bus and left. And I thought, this is crazy. Illinois, you know, all those Chicago guys and stuff, they immediately told their people, have at it. And then we had South Carolina Task Force 1. They're in a big meeting, like a huddle in the corner, and they're debating it. And finally they said, South Carolina, you can have 1 beer. And they had a young South Carolina Task Force member in front of me, and I said, hey, that's 1 beer for each hand. And he said, okay, Chief. And so we were able to have pizza and beer and bond with those rescuers that have come, you know, hundreds of miles to help us. And it was amazing. And then FEMA would come in and they'd say, we want to assess the fire department. And we'd say, this is great. We're going to assess the fire department. Remember, Andrew, we had one night to hand them our big list. That was the first of 7 assessments, you know. So we sit there and Andrew's by now we had a mobile EOC from FEMA, and he's typing real mad, and he's getting all that stuff in, and we're all giving input, and we get this nice big paper of, you know, where we need to be, and then some guy calls it a wish list. It's like a wish list. You look around, what do you see? And so they'd come the next day, and they said, we're assessing the fire department. I said, well, we were assessed yesterday by Bob, Bill, and Tom, and that's FEMA, Bob, Bill, and Tom. And they say, well, we don't know those guys. That's our job. And so we'd go through the same thing, and we'd get assessed. And then the next week, there'd be 3 more or 2 more. And they'd say, we're here to assess you. And I said, well, we got assessed last week, twice. We don't know who did that. This was our job. So 7 different times we were assessed like that. And then finally, the state sent an assessment team down, and FEMA sent an assessment team down, and I stuck them all in a Suburban, and I took them around, and I showed them what flooded equipment looked like, what flooded apparatus looked like, what flooded stations looked like, and I told them, you better take pictures because this is the last time. And they did. And we had 2 pumpers and 2 foam units that we had welded exhaust pipe extensions. They were 4-foot extensions to go through high water. And I had joked with the deputy chiefs. I said, if it floods, FEMA's going to buy us 4 new apparatus. Well, I didn't think that Andrew Vergara had to spec out 14 apparatus. And we're the only fire department in the whole metro area that got new apparatus because we acted on it right away, and I had to call the FEMA director on his cell phone and leave a message, and he's a former fire chief of Miami-Dade. And I said, I'm calling you chief to chief, I need your help. And we have those trucks. And the parish government and Councilman DeFaro, they paid $4.3 million for them, and FEMA hasn't reimbursed us that money yet. But I have the truck, they're paid for, and they're not getting them back. But it's amazing. But I know I've taken enough time, but I see Michelle over here looking at her watch. I was hoping she would talk a few more minutes to you because she deserves a lot of the credit. And she'd come in and she'd interview the people, and I'd see her leave the interview, and I'd see her wiping her eyes, and I'd see those guys wiping their eyes. And, you know, when I read that first insert of the book, I mean, if you weren't stoned like my name, you had to have teared up reading that. And Councilman DeFaro wrote a great foreword in the book, and we appreciate that. But thank you for having me, and Michelle, you did a great job, and Brad Pitt is going to play me in a movie. I just want to let you know. Why is everybody laughing? I said it. Michelle had somebody email her and tell her, not Brad Pitt, more like Clint Eastwood, you know? I mean, I never threw my cape back one time, you know, and had that little cigar, but I like Clint Eastwood, but, you know, he's 30 years older than I am. You know? It's amazing, but I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you. Good night.
Okay, we're going to open up the floor for questions and answers. I want to introduce the firefighters who are up here. The firemen, if you hadn't read the book, they were separated into 5 different locations throughout the parish. So we have a fireman from each location here to answer questions. First we have District Chief Ronald Silva, who was at the Domino Sugar Refinery. And many people have commented on the prologue of the book, the very first story. He was actually one of the firemen who was on that rescue. Next we have Ronald Silva, Captain Ronald Silva. No, Captain Rodney Orso, who was at St. Bernard High School. Then we have District Chief Eddie Appel, who was at Chalmette High School. Then Deputy Chief Glenn Ellis, who was at the Civic Auditorium. Fire Inspector Mark Melanson, who was at the Government Complex. And then on the end, Chief Stone. So if anybody has any questions, you can direct it to anyone or ask them all to answer one question.
We'd ask if you please speak into the mic, because you just have to speak directly into this mic.
I'm from Ohio. I'm here for a week with Habitat for Humanity, and I don't know enough to ask questions. And I would like to hear each of the men say something about their experiences that would give us the basis for asking questions. Because I don't know enough to ask questions. Thank you.
It's pretty hard to put it into words, but just to sum it up, it was a life-changing experience, and we could not have done it without the help of a lot of citizens from St. Bernard Parish and a lot of parish employees. There was quite a few stories that we didn't get a chance to tell, of course. The book would have been probably 5,000 pages. But to sum it up, it was an effort from just people from all over the country that really helped us, and we can't appreciate it enough. And that's about it. Thank you.
Like everybody says up here, there's so many stories that haven't been told. It's hard to put it all into words and get it out there. But each one of us, I mean, the stories that you read in the book, every one of the members of the fire department experienced it. Whether you were at Chalmette High School, the Civic Center, Domino Sugar, each one of those experiences happened at all of the locations. So, you know, it's just hard to put into words what we actually saw and what actually happened down here. But I mean, I thank God I was with the people I was with. I know that, you know, we wouldn't have gotten through that without all of them.
I was at Chalmette High School, and I was the recipient of the extra 25 or so firefighters that didn't have a place to stay that night. And at Chalmette, we were overwhelmed probably before the storm started till eventually we shut Chalmette down with the help of the school employees and a handful of deputies. We managed to keep it going, but there's a million untold incidences. The book probably hit on the high points, and you could probably multiply that thousands of times of individual people doing things, parish residents, and everybody worked together real well.
I was at the cultural center, and I was probably the most fortunate because 95% of the people that we had there were firemen. We had 6 people from Lake Bourne Levee Board with us. With all firemen, or just about all firemen there, it was easy for us to take over and do our job the way we normally do it. Some of the harder things was when the water did come up and we were waiting to be rescued ourselves to get out to help people. I was fortunate that Sean Murphy and Randy Bond heard me calling for them. They came to our assistance, and me, Deputy Chief Jimmy Heinz, and several other people got into boats, started getting one boat and multiplying until we had enough boats to start our rescues. Like Eddie said, with being overwhelmed at the Chalmette High, the first night after I was out, it was too late, and with the debris and everything that was in the water, I was unable to get back to the cultural center. I went to Chalmette High School. And those guys that were at Chalmette High School, I seen with my own eyes the job that they did. They was overwhelmed, just like Chief Appel said, the staff at the high school, they did everything they could. I was just very proud of all our guys because just like Captain Orso said, that there's thousands of stories. All you had to do is look into the people's eyes that stayed that we had to rescue or our citizens rescued. And that was a reason for us to stay. Thank you.
I was at the government complex with Chief Stone. First of all, anyone here stayed for the storm? Can I see a sign of hands? Y'all will leave next time, right? Except for Dr. Batusi, he can't leave. The citizens were great, as Chief Stone said. Fortunately, this parish, for the lady from Ohio, was a fishing community, basically. It seemed like everyone had either a pickup truck and a boat, or both, in their driveway, fortunately. So we had a lot of boats floating around once the water came in. To tell you the whole story would take literally hours. And as Chief Ellis just said, everyone has stories. Not stories. And Michelle put in words that we couldn't. We told her stories. I'm sure they were broken stories in different ways, and she was able to put them together in a way that we couldn't. But once we read it, we relived it immediately. So I think it would help if you read the book and you want a specific question answered, at least for me anyway. Maybe I can answer that. But to go back and explain, Chief Stone put it about as in general as any of us can put the whole scenario from start to finish. But if there's, at least for me, if there's a more specific question, maybe we can zoom in on that a little bit more.
We all know that everyone here was impacted greatly by the storm, but from the 6 heroes that sit up on the stage, I'm kind of curious if you would like to share with us how this personally affected you coming out of it, being a hero? How did you keep that balance of, you know, knowing that you lost everything that you had, but you had to be strong and be a hero, and how did that affect you coming out of it, knowing that you did such a wonderful thing?
Since I got the mic. I don't feel I was a hero. All I did was my job. I'm sure the rest of the guys feel the same way. We still do our job. That just was part of our job. In the book, Michelle's got me is quoted saying that the fire department has always been seen as a catch-all department. It seems like we do the things that nobody else wants to do. You know, sure, if you're having a break-in, you call the sheriff's department. A criminal activity, you call the sheriff's department. If someone's really injured, you call the fire department also, but EMS is the main player in that. But we also respond with the police. We respond with the EMS. We respond to cats in the tree. Shoot, we had a call the other night. A lady lost a cell phone in the sewer. What do you call it? Fire department. So, you know, we attempt to do what we can, and it's usually, and we still, in my life, other than losing everything and all of that, I mean, we all the residents here have lost. We haven't lost our material belongings, we lost our friends, our neighbors, our whole community. And now we're working on the material things of the infrastructure. The family's going to take years to bring back. And I don't mean just the close family, I mean the friends' family. As far as me personally on my job, we still do, and I know these guys still do the best they can, which is extremely good. Trust me, they do a really good job. These guys are great. And that's me.
I guess one of your questions, or part of your question was, how do we keep going faced with all of this? When it initially happens, especially when the water came in, your initial reaction is of being overwhelmed. First, you know, you can't believe it, and then you get overwhelmed by everything that's going on. But with us, I'm sure everybody here, we've had a lot of training, and that kind of kicks in, and you start prioritizing what you need to do. You know, you see the problems, and you start addressing them. Some of the personal things that we've seen, the suffering of the people, you know, I can only speak for what I saw at St. Bernard High School. And, you know, the conditions were terrible. You know, people had animals there with them. There was no place to separate the animals from the people. So you had, you know, just a mess everywhere. We lost all of our water, all of our provisions were on the first floor in the cafeteria. So you start prioritizing what you need to do, and a lot of stuff you just internally kind of compartmentalize. You know, you just put it aside, and you think about that later. Concentrate on the next thing you need to do. So that's kind of how I believe most of us coped with it. You know, and you know, we knew what we needed to do, and we went out and did it.
I'm from Connecticut. I'm also here with Habitat for Humanity, and want to thank you guys so much. The question that I have is, living in Connecticut and being so close to New York City after 9/11 struck us pretty hard back home. And I'm wondering, you know, hearing our firefighters talk about how they handled a catastrophe of that nature, and hearing about the communication and when everything broke down and no system was working, did you receive any kind of support or contact, whether physical support or sort of the intangible kind of verbal support from the New York City Fire Department? And have you drawn on them at all, or have they been in contact with you?
No. Our firefighters raised $70,000 for the New York City Fire Department after September 11th. And between us and Judy Hoffmeister and the Red Cross, our community raised $135,000 in one weekend, immediately following September 11th. Now, New York City did go to New Orleans, and they had their firefighters there. And they even gave back the Spirit of Louisiana, which was a fire apparatus that we purchased for the citizens of New York City and their fire department. In fact, the chief of New Orleans said, when New York leaves, you can have that truck. I said, I don't want it. But no, ma'am, not from New York. But we've received help from all over. And I want to comment on one of the things that I think it was Mark alluded to. Our citizens were great. Our hats are off to you. We have videos that show our parish look like a third world country in a war, with our citizens on the ferry landing, our citizens at the Chalmette Slip. Our deputies did a great job of keeping those people in those areas and getting them out of the parish. We would bring them and drop them off and never know what happened to them. But they would come back later and they would hug us, or they would send messages through emails or on the forum. And we never had any civil unrest at all in St. Bernard Parish. And we're, not only am I proud of all of our firefighters, extremely proud, but I'm proud of all the citizens of St. Bernard Parish and how they acted in the emergency.
Hi, I'm Francis. I'm from Lynn, Massachusetts. I'm also here working with Habitat and staying at Camp Hope. I don't even know how to ask this question. I'm hearing since the very beginning when Hurricane Katrina happened and all the way to even now, there are so many details and raised eyebrows and quotes about, well, we were delayed, as you said, we were delayed in bringing in certain people because they didn't want to pay the overtime. National Red Cross moves in and the people there are told they can't do a certain thing or walk somewhere which would make sense. When common sense, how did you deal with these agencies and these big parties and those for whom common sense went out the window? How did you deal with that and actually be able to, how did you deal with that? How did it complicate your job? I know it's a big question, I'm sorry. And can you give us perhaps an example to illustrate that in this situation, you just act with common sense? I mean, does that make it, I'm sorry, it's such a hard question. It's like, look, what do you do with all that? I mean, there's just all these people coming forward to you and saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, and said, well, excuse me, well, I'm still going to do it. I guess that's what it comes down to. I don't know.
First of all, I want to thank all the volunteers that has come through the parish that stayed at Camp Hope. The parish wouldn't be in the position it is now of rebuilding with all the dedicated people. I'm talking about high school kids all the way up to people in their 70s coming down helping. They were almost killing themselves, but they wouldn't stop. And I want to thank y'all for coming. I'm sure that everybody in this room is fooled with the federal government, with FEMA, SBA, LRA. After saying those alphabets, I don't think anybody would understand the trouble that we went through personally or at the parish trying to get help. Because you talk to one person one day, like the chief said, the next day you speak to somebody else and nothing was getting done. We pretty much did what we needed to do. Equipment was used to clear roads. One of the things what you said with government problems, FEMA came down with ice one day. They had 3 reefers, 18-wheelers of ice. They wanted us dump it on the ground, and they would come back in 3 days to give us more. At that point, it was, it was one of those things that we didn't have all the people in the parish at that time. At that point, people were being evacuated out. 1 reefer would have been good enough for us at that time to use, and in 3 days they would bring us some more. That's not how FEMA works. They wanted us to put it on the ground, let it melt, and they'd come back. That's the only way I can answer the question how the government works.
He's telling it, that's the truth, and Mr. Rodriguez told me, call the sheriff's department and tell them those reefers aren't leaving here. And we're looking at this, the FEMA lady, and I'm saying, man, do you realize tomorrow we won't have any ice? And you know, you don't realize how cold water, how good cold water tastes until you don't have any cold water. And I was able to negotiate with the FEMA representative to take 2 of the trailers and just leave with the ice on it and leave us 1, and that ice lasted 2 weeks. But that's the kind of stuff that was done, but they kept telling us, and I see Councilman DeFaro back there, and he could tell you all the meetings they were in, and you'd hear something that was told to them, and then 4 weeks later, a new FEMA person comes in and changes everything. And you know, with you've went through it with the permit process and everything, and they just kept telling us we've never been to a disaster like this, and we're rewriting the book as we go along.
Before I came down here, I had seen on the internet many pictures of people on their roofs and being rescued by all kinds of different boats. And you've mentioned not only your own boats, but the boats that private citizens have. And there's a man who's been hanging out with us at Camp Hope who was here through the entire...
We don't have his boat.
Huh? He didn't have a boat. He and his wife, when they saw the fish swimming past their patio glass, pulled down the attic stairs and went to their attic. And he cut a hole in his attic roof. And his neighbors hailed a boat that was coming by. And he is on a one-man campaign to get skylights into roofs so that people will have a way out.
If they leave, they won't need a skylight.
Mark said if they leave, they won't need a skylight. My poor son can tell you that the skylight is leaking now after the new roof.
We got time for this one and one back there.
First of all, my hat's off to all you firefighters. The whole parish loves you all for what y'all done. Chief, if you had to make a change, or maybe you are making a change or an improvement in your department, what is the biggest thing you're doing now that you've learned the hardest lesson in life, Katrina? So what are you doing to make things better, improve, or whatever, changes or whatever?
Well, Mr. Amadio, thank you. And people probably don't know Mr. Amadio. He had a fire truck that would be used for all the kids' parties and ride in the parades, and he was kind of like our auxiliary force. If our pumpers didn't work, we could call that oval pack truck and it would work. And you lost yours too, yes. Well, one thing I wouldn't change is I wouldn't have wanted to spend or go through a type 1 incident with any other people than the 114 members of the St. Bernard Parish Fire Department that I went through this one with, because they were fantastic. In the future, our plans now are we're leaving half of our force is going to Tangipahoa Parish because FEMA will not reimburse us. In fact, hopefully Councilman DeFaro will reimburse us for the trucks we have now, but they won't pay for apparatus again. And we had sent our 2 newest pumpers and our 2 rescue squads out of the area. And Tangipahoa leaves multiple ways back into St. Bernard Parish in a disaster. The radio system that we have now, we're on the new 700 megahertz and 800 megahertz radio system from the Urban Area Security Initiative, which is Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines parishes. That's the 52 largest urban areas in the United States. And the 700 system is the state system. This radio system now, we've talked 60 miles into Mississippi to St. Bernard Parish, and Captain also can tell you, I was talking to him from Beaumont, Texas the other day on the radio when I was coming back from class at Texas A&M. And what we did was we also put some talk around channels in it in case we lose the 800 system, we lose the 700 system. We're going to call Raleigh back from retirement. We're going back on the roofs of buildings and going to relay messages again. So we'll have that to work. So just the radio system has been great. I'd love to see us rebuild the fire department back to the way it was. You know, fire departments are rated on a class from 1 to 10, with 1 being the best and 10 being virtually no fire protection at all. And we were a very proud Class 2 fire department. And I would love to see us again operate out of the 10 fire stations parish-wide, maintain our force, but what that takes is for our friends and our neighbors to move back into St. Bernard Parish. And the other thing is, I'm having the council pass an ordinance that no hurricanes are allowed in St. Bernard Parish ever again.
I've read the book, Ms. Buuck, and I read it in a day and a half, and a night and a half, because once you pick it up, and I'm not trying to sell away, but you can't put it down. And my observation in reading the book is two big points that are focused virtually in every chapter you read: professionalism and compassion from these guys. And frankly, I knew them all before the hurricane, and I didn't think they had much compassion. And the professionalism they always did have. And lastly, this is a sore subject between Chief Stone and I over the years about the extra duty he took on, his fire department took on, of being first responders. And I have egg on my face now, because I always thought that was not part of a firefighter's duty to be a first responder as far as medically treated people. Well, thank God I was wrong on that, because the effort they did at Chalmette and St. Bernard High School around giving first aid to people that were injured was just saved a lot of lives alone. So I apologize for you for ever criticizing your insisting that people have first responder training. And it's a privilege to serve and work with you guys, and I hope to work with you in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pacey. 82% of the EMS services in the United States are run by the fire service, and St. Bernard's Parish's EMS should be run by the fire service too. And I know Captain Figueroa's retired District Chief Figueroa did a lot of work early on when I became chief, and it almost became a reality, but it should be. We should run EMS. And Mr. Pacey has the pleasure of representing us in all the fictitious lawsuits that are out there against us. And believe me, I don't remember seeing $2,500 worth of personal items in any boat that I went in that someone would leave in their boat. But we're being defended against that. And a certain company, we had their golf shirts, and I never saw one of them. But I'll tell you what kind of shirts our guys had. I saw those. You know. But thank you, Mr. Pacey.
We're going to get Michelle to pull our door prize, if she would.
Michelle, I hope it's French doors. That's what I need on my own.
Elaine Starnes. Is that, I pronounced that right? Elaine Starnes? And I think we're going to see Michelle. Oh, who are we going to see for the, up here. Okay, at the book. Oh. Come on up and get your book, Elaine. There you go, Elaine. Elaine says, after teaching all these firefighters, it's pretty good to get a book for that. We are going to do the book signing up here. So for those of you who have books and are interested in these gentlemen signing the books, you can come and walk up here. They're going to sign. There are books at the back table. And I think you all agree that we should really give a very, very good ovation to these fine heroes.